The night of December 1st, 1942, Provincetown, on the tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. A storm of near hurricane force has slammed into the coast, with winds blowing at 60 miles per hour, driving rain and a heavy pounding surf. Out in the churning water, the Coast Guard yawl Rose, a sailing vessel conscripted for wartime service to watch for German U-boats off the American coast, has been thrown onto a sandbar. The wind and the waves are tearing her apart. 7 men are aboard, and they are going to die because the storm is too violent for any conventional rescue boat to reach them. Rescue craft have tried to launch and have been driven back by the surf. The 7 Coast Guardsmen are clinging to a breaking ship in a 60-mile-an-hour gale, and there is, by every normal measure, no way to save them. Sitting on the beach nearby is a strange-looking vehicle. It looks, at first glance, like a truck that has been stuffed into a boat or a boat that has grown 6 wheels. It is an experimental amphibious truck brought to Provincetown for a demonstration to skeptical Army officers, a demonstration that the storm has just postponed. The man in charge of it is not a soldier. He is a yacht designer named Rod Stevens, a man who, with his brother, had won the America's Cup, the most prestigious sailing trophy in the world, just 5 years earlier. Stevens looks at the breaking ship and the drowning men, and he makes a decision. He climbs into the strange vehicle, drives it off the beach, straight into the boiling surf that has defeated every conventional rescue boat, and motors out through the storm to the wreck of the Rose. He pulls all 7 Coast Guardsmen off the breaking ship, turns the vehicle around, drives back through the surf, climbs the beach, and delivers the rescued men to safety. A photographer is there. He captures the whole thing, and those photographs are about to change the course of one of the strangest and most successful vehicle programs of the entire Second World War. The vehicle was called the DUKW. The soldiers would call it the Duck, and until that night, the Army had not wanted it at all. To understand why anyone would build a truck that could swim, you have to understand the problem of the beach in amphibious warfare. When an invasion force lands on a hostile shore, getting the troops onto the beach is only the beginning of the problem. The far harder problem is supply. An army on a beach consumes enormous quantities of ammunition, fuel, food, and equipment, all of which has to come from ships anchored offshore. And the transfer of that cargo from ship to shore was, in 1942, a slow, clumsy, and dangerous process. Cargo had to be lowered from the ship into a landing craft. The landing craft had to motor to the beach. At the beach, the cargo had to be manhandled out of the landing craft and onto the sand. Then trucks had to come down to the waterline, be loaded with the cargo, and haul it inland. Every transfer point, ship to landing craft to beach, beach to truck, was a bottleneck, a place where cargo piled up, where men labored under enemy fire, where time was lost. The dream was to eliminate the transfer points. What if a single vehicle could be loaded with cargo at the ship, swim to the beach under its own power, drive up out of the water without stopping, and carry the cargo directly inland to the troops who needed it? No transfer from ship to landing craft, no transfer from landing craft to truck, just one vehicle carrying the cargo the whole way, from the side of the ship to the front line. Such a vehicle would collapse 3 slow, dangerous transfers into one continuous journey. It would revolutionize the logistics of amphibious warfare. The only problem was that such a vehicle did not exist, and most military men doubted it could be built. A vehicle that was good enough at being a boat would be a bad truck, and a vehicle that was good enough at being a truck would be a bad boat. The two requirements seemed fundamentally incompatible. To build a vehicle that could swim to a beach and then drive inland, you needed someone who understood both boats and trucks, and you needed them to solve the problem fast. This is the paradox at the center of the story. The vehicle that would become one of the most important logistical tools of the Allied war effort, that would land millions of tons of supplies across beaches from Sicily to Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, was at first rejected by the very military that needed it. The Army looked at the DUKW and saw a silly civilian contraption, a truck pretending to be a boat, that fit into none of its tactical plans. The men who designed it were not military engineers. They were yacht designers and sailors and a young reserve officer. The vehicle was built by a division of General Motors that made buses and trucks, not warships. Everything about the DUKW marked it as an outsider's solution, an idea from the wrong people, built by the wrong company, that the military establishment did not ask for and did not want. And yet the DUKW worked brilliantly and became indispensable. The resolution of the paradox is that the problem of the swimming truck was not really a military problem at all. It was a naval architecture problem combined with an automotive engineering problem, and the people best equipped to solve it were not soldiers, but yacht designers and truck builders. The military knew it had a beach supply problem, but it did not know how to solve it, and it was instinctively suspicious of a solution that came from outside its own world. It took a dramatic, undeniable demonstration, the rescue of 7 drowning men in a storm that defeated every conventional boat, to break through that suspicion. Once the military could see what the DUKW could do, its resistance collapsed. But the story of the DUKW is a story about how the best solution to a military problem came from civilians the military did not take seriously, and about how close that solution came to being rejected entirely. The popular history of the Second World War remembers the landing craft, the Higgins boats that carried the troops onto the beaches at Normandy, their ramps dropping into the surf. It remembers the great amphibious assaults, the famous beaches, the famous days. It remembers very little about how the armies that landed on those beaches were supplied in the days and weeks that followed, and almost nothing about the strange 6-wheeled amphibious trucks that did so much of that supplying. The DUKW is, today, mostly remembered as a tourist novelty, the duck boat that carries sightseers around the harbors of American cities, a quirky relic with a funny name. Its serious military significance has been largely forgotten. This is a shame, because the DUKW was one of the genuine logistical war winners. On D-Day alone, over 2,000 DUKWs were committed to the landings, and over the following 90 days, they carried millions of tons of supplies ashore in uninterrupted service. The vehicle that the Army nearly rejected became, in the words of one official who championed it, one of the most valuable pieces of equipment the Allies possessed. The men who designed it, Rod Stevens, the yacht designer, Dennis Poliston, the deep-water sailor, Frank Spear, the young MIT-trained reserve officer, Palmer Putnam, the entrepreneur who drove the project, are not famous. And the vehicle they created is remembered as a curiosity rather than as the serious military innovation it was. The story of how a yacht designer and a bus company built a truck that could swim, and how that truck nearly died in committee before a storm and a sinking ship saved it, deserves to be remembered. The DUKW began with a government committee and an apparently impossible assignment. In 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt had established the National Defense Research Committee to coordinate scientific research on the problems underlying warfare. As the United States moved toward war and as the lessons of amphibious operations became clearer, the committee took up the problem of beach supply. The man placed in charge of the amphibious vehicle effort was Palmer C. Putnam, an entrepreneur and engineer with a yachtsman's interest in boats. Putnam was given what amounted to an impossible mission: design an amphibious vehicle larger than the small amphibious jeep that had already been attempted, that could move supplies directly from ship to shore. The vehicle had to perform as well on land as any ordinary truck of its size, and it had to have real seagoing ability, able to handle rough swells, high surf, and to drive over reefs and sandbars. Putnam's insight was that the vehicle should not be designed from scratch. It should be based on a truck that already existed and was already in mass production, so that it could be built quickly and in quantity. The truck he chose was the GMC CCKW, the 2.5-ton six-wheel drive cargo truck, the famous Deuce and a Half, the workhorse of the American military that was being built in enormous numbers. The plan was to take this proven truck chassis with its engine and drivetrain and six-wheel drive system and wrap it in a watertight boat hull, add a propeller for water propulsion, and create an amphibious vehicle that retained all the land capability of the truck while gaining the ability to swim. It was a brilliant concept, but the execution was extraordinarily difficult, and Putnam knew that he could not do it with truck engineers alone. He needed someone who understood boats, who understood hulls and buoyancy, and how a vessel behaves in surf. He needed a naval architect. And so Putnam, a yachtsman himself, turned to the most prestigious yacht design firm in America. The firm was Sparkman and Stevens of New York, the premier yacht design firm in the United States, and the man who took on the DUKW hull was Rod Stevens, Jr. Roderick Stevens and his older brother Olin were among the most celebrated yacht designers in the world. Just 5 years earlier, in 1937, the Stevens brothers had designed the yacht that won the America's Cup, the most prestigious prize in international sailing. Rod Stevens was a master of naval architecture, a man who understood at the deepest level how a hull moves through water, how a vessel handles waves and surf, how to make a boat seaworthy. He was exactly the kind of expert that the DUKW project needed, and he was about as far from a military vehicle engineer as it was possible to be. He was a sailor and a designer of racing yachts, and he was now being asked to design the hull of an amphibious military truck. Stevens worked alongside two other key figures. Dennis Pulliston was a British deep-water sailor, a man who had spent years sailing small boats across oceans and who understood, from hard experience, how a vessel behaves in rough water. Frank Spear was a young reserve officer, recently out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who would handle much of the engineering integration and who would later become a central figure in the Army's amphibious vehicle program. Together with a team of General Motors engineers, this group of sailors and engineers set out to solve the problem of the swimming truck. The combination was unusual and inspired. The yacht designers brought the naval architecture, the understanding of hulls and seaworthiness that no truck engineer possessed. The GM engineers brought the automotive expertise, the knowledge of how to integrate a hull with a truck chassis and drivetrain. And the young MIT officer bridged the two worlds. It was an outsider's team, assembled to solve a problem the insiders could not, and it worked with astonishing speed. The speed with which the DUKW was designed is one of the most remarkable facts about it. The work began in earnest in the spring of 1942. On April 21st, the contract was signed with the General Motors subsidiary. 3 days later, on April 24th, a GM team began building a mock-up out of wood, sheet metal, and cardboard. Working through a weekend, they finished the mock-up on Monday, April 27th. And from that point, the full design and the building of the first running prototype proceeded at a pace that seems almost impossible. By various accounts, the DUKW went from the start of design work to a finished running prototype in something between 38 and 42 days. A little over a month to design and build from scratch a vehicle that had never existed before, a truck that could swim. This speed was possible because of Putnam's fundamental decision to base the vehicle on the existing CCKW truck. The team did not have to design an engine, a transmission, a drivetrain, or a six-wheel drive system. All of that already existed, proven, and in production. What they had to design was the hull that would wrap around the truck, the propeller and water propulsion system, the steering for the water, and the integration of all of this with the existing truck mechanicals. Rod Stevens designed a welded steel hull that fit snugly under the chassis of the standard Army truck, a hull that sacrificed not an ounce of the truck's cargo capacity able to carry 5,000 pounds of cargo or 25 soldiers with their gear. The hull was the genius of the design, the part that only a master naval architect could have produced, a boat hull integrated with a truck so cleverly that the vehicle was a fully capable truck on land and a genuinely seaworthy boat on water. In 38 days, the team had turned a cardboard mock-up into a working amphibious truck. The engineering of the DUKW was a clever marriage of truck and boat. The foundation was the GMC truck chassis, with its 6-cylinder engine producing about 94 horsepower, its transmission, and its 6-wheel drive system. On land, the DUKW was, essentially, the CCKW truck, with the same hauling capability, the same 6-wheel drive that let it grind through mud and sand, a top road speed of around 50 miles per hour, and an operational range of about 400 miles. It drove like a truck because, mechanically, it was a truck. The difference was the watertight hull that enclosed the whole chassis, turning the vehicle into a boat. For water propulsion, a single 3-bladed propeller was mounted at the rear of the hull, driven by the same engine that drove the wheels through a transfer case that could direct power to the wheels, to the propeller, or to both. In the water, the propeller pushed the vehicle along at a top speed of about 6.5 miles per hour. Steering in the water was accomplished by a rudder mounted behind the propeller, and the front wheels, which remained steerable, also helped turn the vehicle when afloat. A bilge pump managed any water that leaked into the hull. The transition between land and water was the magic of the vehicle. A DUKW could drive down a beach straight into the surf, with the driver engaging the propeller as the wheels lost traction and motor out to sea without stopping. Coming the other way, it could motor in from the water, let its wheels touch the bottom, engage the 6-wheel drive, and climb straight up the beach and onto dry land, again without stopping. The seamless transition between truck and boat in both directions was exactly what the beach supply problem demanded. One feature of the DUKW deserves special mention because it was a genuine innovation that outlived the war and became standard on military vehicles around the world. This was the central tire inflation system, the ability of the driver to vary the tire pressure from inside the cab while the vehicle was moving. The reason this mattered was that the DUKW had to operate on radically different surfaces. On a hard road, the tires needed to be fully inflated for efficiency and speed. On soft beach sand, the tires needed to be much less inflated, so that they would spread out and float over the sand rather than digging in and bogging down. Normally, changing tire pressure meant stopping, getting out, and manually inflating or deflating each tire, an impossible thing to do on a beach under fire. Frank Speyer, the young MIT-trained officer, developed the system that solved this. The DUKW became the first vehicle in the world to allow the driver to vary the tire pressure from inside the cab. Air was fed to the wheel hubs through a system of pipes, and the driver could let air out of the tires for soft sand and pump it back in for hard roads, all without leaving the vehicle, all while moving. Recommended pressure levels for various terrains were painted on the inside of the cab. This central tire inflation system was a real breakthrough, and it is now standard on many military vehicles around the world, from the heaviest trucks to armored personnel carriers. It was invented for the duck, to let it cross the soft sand of a beach without bogging down, and it became one of the lasting legacies of the program, a piece of engineering that has been quietly improving the off-road capability of military vehicles for 80 years. The DUKW prototype was finished in June of 1942, and it was tested extensively in the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, in off-road trials, in loading tests. And despite the vehicle's evident capability, the Army did not want it. The initial military reaction was skeptical, even dismissive. The Army looked at the DUKW and saw a strange civilian contraption that did not fit into any of its established tactical doctrines. The senior officers could not figure out where the swimming truck belonged in their plans. It was neither a proper boat nor a proper truck in their thinking, but an awkward hybrid that did not have an obvious place in the order of battle. The skeptics judged the book by its cover and concluded that there was nothing particularly special about the DUKW. This was the moment when the entire program nearly died. A brilliant vehicle, designed in 38 days by a team of yacht designers and engineers, tested and proven capable, was on the verge of being rejected by the military. It was meant to serve simply because the military could not see how to use it. Palmer Putnam, who had driven the project, feared that the amphibians might sit out the war in some Detroit warehouse. The men who had championed the DUKW understood that they had built something valuable, but they could not convince the people who mattered. The vehicle needed something more than test results and demonstrations to overcome the institutional resistance. It needed something dramatic, something undeniable, something that would show the doubters, beyond any argument, what the Duck could do. And then, on the night of December 1st, 1942, the storm hit Provincetown, and the Coast Guard yawl Rose ran onto a sandbar, and 7 men began to drown. The DUKW team had gathered at Provincetown to give a demonstration to about 90 officers and civilians, a demonstration of the vehicle unloading a ship and carrying cargo inland. The storm postponed the demonstration, and then the storm created a far more compelling demonstration than any the team could have planned. The Rose, driven onto the sandbar by 60-mile-an-hour winds, was breaking up, and conventional rescue boats could not reach her through the surf. Rod Stevens, the yacht designer, took the experimental DUKW into the water. With a photographer named Rosenfeld documenting the whole thing, Stevens drove the Duck off the beach, through the pounding surf that had defeated every conventional craft, out to the foundering Rose, took all 7 Coast Guardsmen aboard, and brought them safely back to shore. The photographs were the key. Rosenfeld took the dramatic images of the rescue, headed to his New York studio, printed them, got on a train to Washington, and handed them to a high-ranking Army official, suggesting that the official might enjoy showing them to the Secretary of the Navy. The official was delighted to be able to demonstrate an Army rescue of the Navy, since the Coast Guard was then under Navy control, and he was sure that President Roosevelt would enjoy the event as well. And so the photographs traveled up the chain of command all the way to the President. 4 days after the rescue, at the rescheduled Provincetown demonstration in 10-foot waves, the DUKWs unloaded cargo and a gun battery from a Liberty ship in record time and carried howitzers and men through the surf and across the sand dunes. The combination of the dramatic rescue, the compelling photographs, and the successful demonstration broke through the military's resistance. The opposition to the DUKW, as one account put it, melted. The vehicle that the Army had not wanted was suddenly a vehicle the Army needed. With the military resistance broken, the DUKW went into mass production. It was adopted in October of 1942, and serial production was pushed to General Motors plants as quickly as possible. The vehicle was built primarily at GM facilities in Pontiac, Michigan, and at a plant in St. Louis, Missouri. Over the course of the war, from late 1942 to 1945, General Motors and its subcontractors produced 21,147 DUKWs at a unit cost of about $10,750 each. The Army organized dozens of amphibious truck companies and assigned over 12,000 soldiers to operate and maintain the vehicles. The Duck went to war. Its first major combat use came in the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, in July of 1943, where the DUKWs proved their value in moving supplies across the invasion beaches. From there, the Duck became a fixture of nearly every major Allied amphibious operation for the rest of the war. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, over 2,000 DUKWs supported the Normandy landings, and over the following 90 days they carried millions of tons of supplies ashore in continuous service, a logistical contribution without which the Normandy campaign could not have been sustained. DUKWs served in the invasion of southern France, in the crossing of the Rhine, in the Battle of the Scheldt that opened the port of Antwerp. In the Pacific, the DUK served in nearly all of the island assaults from Guadalcanal onward, ferrying supplies and artillery across the reefs and beaches of the island-hopping campaign. The vehicle that had nearly been rejected became one of the most widely used and most valuable logistical tools of the entire Allied war effort, the only wheeled amphibious vehicle to serve in such numbers on the Allied side. The DUKW was supplied not only to American forces, but to the Allies through Lend-Lease. About 2,000 went to Britain, where they served in operations from Sicily to the Rhine. Around 800 went to Canada, whose forces were heavily involved in the amphibious operations in the Netherlands. The Australians received over 500, using them in the campaigns in New Guinea. The Soviet Union received nearly 600, and after the war, the Soviets built their own copy, the BAV-485, producing over 2,000 of them into the 1960s. The Free French operated DUKWs in the landings in southern France. The DUK became a genuinely international vehicle, serving the armed forces of most of the major Allied nations. After the war, the DUKW had a long and varied afterlife. The United States Army reactivated DUKWs for the Korean War, where they brought supplies ashore during the Pusan perimeter fighting and the amphibious landing at Incheon. French DUKWs served in Indochina, and British DUKWs served in Malaya and Borneo. As the military vehicles were gradually retired, many DUKWs passed into civilian hands, serving as rescue vehicles for fire departments and Coast Guard stations, and eventually, the surviving DUKWs found their most visible modern role as tourist vehicles, the duck boats that carry sightseers on amphibious tours through the harbors and rivers of cities around the world. The strange swimming truck, designed in 38 days by a yacht designer, became, decades later, a familiar sight bobbing through tourist waterways, most of the passengers having no idea that the vehicle beneath them had carried the supplies that sustained the armies that won the Second World War. It would be wrong to pretend the DUKW was perfect, and an honest account has to note its limitations. It was lightly built, with a thin hull and chassis, because it was designed only to last long enough to meet the demands of combat, not to be a durable long-term vehicle. Its cargo capacity, about 2.5 tons, was modest, and dozens of overloaded DUKWs, pushed beyond their safe limits, now rest at the bottom of the English Channel and the Mediterranean and the Pacific, having foundered under loads too heavy for their hulls. Its sea-keeping ability, while remarkable for a truck, left something to be desired in rough conditions. Its lack of armor meant it could not be used in the first assault waves, so it was generally relegated to ferrying supplies and follow-on forces rather than spearheading assaults. But these limitations have to be weighed against what the DUKW actually achieved. It was never meant to be a warship or a heavily armored assault vehicle. It was meant to solve the beach supply problem, and at that job it excelled. The modest cargo capacity was multiplied by the enormous numbers of DUKWs in service, over 21,000 built, hundreds or thousands committed to a single operation, each one making trip after trip from ship to shore. The DUKW was a perfect example of a vehicle designed to be good enough, available in quantity, rather than perfect and rare. And good enough, multiplied by 21,000, was more than enough to make the DUK one of the war's logistical triumphs. The lesson of the DUKW is a lesson about where good solutions come from, and about the danger of institutional resistance to outsiders. The Army had a real problem, the beach supply problem, and it could not solve it from within its own ranks because the solution required expertise the Army did not have. The naval architecture of a yacht designer combined with the manufacturing capability of a truck company. The solution came from outside, from civilians, from a yacht designer, and a deep-water sailor, and a young reserve officer working with bus and truck engineers. And precisely because it came from outside, the Army nearly rejected it. The institutional instinct was to distrust the unfamiliar solution from the unfamiliar people, to see the swimming truck as a silly civilian contraption rather than as the answer to a genuine military need. What saved the DUKW was not a better argument or a more thorough demonstration. It was a dramatic, undeniable event, the rescue of 7 drowning men in a storm that defeated every conventional craft, captured in photographs that traveled all the way to the President. The rescue did not prove anything that the test results had not already shown. The DUKW's capabilities were known before Provincetown. What the rescue did was make those capabilities impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, impossible to bury in committee. It cut through the institutional resistance by force of sheer drama. This is a recurring pattern in the history of innovation, the brilliant solution that nearly dies, because the establishment cannot see its value, saved only by some dramatic demonstration that makes the value undeniable. The DUKW was a great idea that almost failed, not because it did not work, but because the people who needed it could not, at first, recognize that they needed it. It took a storm and a sinking ship to open their eyes. In a war decided by what could reach the beach, what reached the beach was a truck that could swim. It was designed in 38 days by a yacht designer who had won the America's Cup, built around a truck chassis that already existed, wrapped in a welded steel hull that turned a deuce and a half into a boat without sacrificing an ounce of its cargo capacity. It had a propeller at the back and a rudder behind the propeller and 6 driven wheels beneath the hull, and it could drive off a beach into the surf and motor out to a ship, or motor in from a ship, and climb straight up the sand without ever stopping at the waterline. It collapsed the slow, dangerous transfers of amphibious supply into a single continuous journey, and in doing so, it solved one of the hardest logistical problems of amphibious warfare. The Army did not want it. The swimming truck looked silly to the men whose job was to think about tanks and infantry and artillery, and they could not fit it into their plans. It took a yacht designer driving an experimental vehicle into a 60-mile-an-hour gale to rescue 7 drowning Coast Guardsmen and a photographer to capture it, and those photographs traveling all the way to President Roosevelt to break through the resistance. Once the Army could see what the Duck could do, it built 21,000 of them, and they carried the supplies that sustained the landings at Sicily and Salerno and Anzio and Normandy and southern France and the islands of the Pacific. On D-Day alone, 2,000 ducks carried millions of tons of supplies across the Normandy beaches over 90 days of uninterrupted service. In a war fought between industrial societies, the society that could turn to a yacht designer and a bus company and have them produce, in 38 days, a truck that could swim was a society whose flexibility and openness its enemies could not match. The solution came from outsiders, from civilians the military did not take seriously, and it nearly died because of that. But it lived because of a storm and a sinking ship and a yacht designer's courage, and it became one of the quiet logistical triumphs that won the war. The Duck was not glamorous. It carried cargo, not glory. It is remembered today, when it is remembered at all, as a tourist novelty with a funny name. But it solved a problem that the famous landing craft could not solve, and it did so by being exactly what its detractors mocked it for being, a truck that could swim. In a war decided by what worked, the swimming truck worked. That was enough. It was, in the end, one of the strange and brilliant improvisations that carried the supplies that won the war.